좀 더 적극적으로 시도해야 되지 않나 싶습니다.
And thus a medium-long discussion about the nature of art arose, in which two different sides were taken that both, interestingly, didn't match with the currently popular idea of art. I say currently because different centuries had different views of the matter, because of a very different usage of whatever art was considered back there and then altogether. But I separate myself from that view not just through time, but especially through usage. I will explain that in a bit. If you would meet me at a house party or birthday barbecue, and we condulged in some consensual small talk about the weather, and then moved on to our professions as these things usually go, you would most likely not hear the word artist coming out of my mouth. Instead, I would say I'm a painter, or I tattoo, or I work in movies. Or it's hard to say, I'm a more or less successful jack of all trades kind of person. Your guess is as good as mine. And this has been the case since I can think. Yes, the confusion about my profession too, but I actually mean my special treatment of the term artist. In fact, I wrote an essay about my definition of art in 11th grade, and it hasn't changed all that much since. My personal feeling of what art means, at least to me, has somehow had a very natural way of establishing itself in my life, and I honestly can't really say where it came from. Before I open this can of worms, though, I want to emphasize that the topic is quite complex and in a constant flux. But trying to define art is not really a quest to find the truth anyway, I would say. It's much more just a clumsy attempt to make sense of something that is so subjective that no two people make sense of it in the same way. Terms like beauty, justice, and art are made-up constructs. We create these terms to have a way of starting a dialogue about these abstract things. Because without those terms and their boundaries, clear or vague, we would have no way of expressing ourselves properly and satisfyingly to our emotional and intellectual needs. And then, unfortunately, we often diverge into misunderstandings and disagreements from there. Classic human. So we will never reach a point where everyone is on exactly the same page with everything, and that's why relationships are so damn hard. Thus, in trying to define a concept as nuanced as art, we reveal that underlying phenomenon that words themselves don't hold any truth but the truth we adhere to it. As an example, I noticed that one of my friends used the word aloof in a totally wrong context, and that repeatedly so. That doesn't mean that he was saying something that wasn't true when he was stating one thing while meaning another. He just used the wrong word to make his point. But the statement behind his words was still the same, even when dressed in foreign clothing. So it's not so much about the term itself, but more about the truth behind the term that is determined by the one who utters it. And that truth is different for everyone, for almost everything, that is not as clearly defined as the most basic math problem. And that's, in my opinion, what makes defining art in total unity nearly impossible, because there is no absolute truth to it, which is why myriads of books have already been written about it, and why every great thinker since the dawn of philosophy already gave his 2 cents to the enigma. And in any case, slapping a label on something so multifaceted is a trap, because it cages your thinking in one box, while there are many other boxes to open in order to advance this Lego project. There are lots of seemingly universal definitions about art out there, or at least attempts. But in the end, art is what you say it is. It's just a term. But even though the word itself is just a name for an abstract concept that went through so many processes already, and will go through many more for as long as humankind wanders the earth, I do have my own 2 cents to give to its definition. How could I not? Art is highly subjective because each and every one of us goes through life differently, and thus no side is ever an absolute truth or an absolute falsity. But as I see it, generalizing the meaning of art is just as restrictive as putting it in just one of many boxes. But that's exactly what is happening with contemporary art since quite some time now, as I've come to realize. A generalization to the point of complete meaninglessness. For the past week, I lingered around on Reddit to find out what the greater populace has to say about art. Opinions on the subject in various subreddits like Art Lounge and Philosophy are as diverse as the ingredient list of my daily breakfast smoothie, but they mostly boil down to the claim that everything is art. Now that's one way to look at it, I guess. But for me personally, the possibility to have profound conversations about the topic has been taken from me through this generalization. So I want to take this video as an opportunity to reclaim my right to talk about it in my own way. But first I want to come back to my friend and the Boulder, who presented yet another view of it. When challenging his proposition that a stone in a garden is art, he said that, I quote, "Nature does create art because we are an expression of nature. We are an aspect of it, so our art is also an expression of nature." End quote. This takes the definition of art into the spiritual, and for temporal reason I can't muse about that for as long as I would actually love to. But I want to say that it is in fact holding a truth that is much more absolute than any other definition I came across. I don't agree with him where the equalization of art and nature is concerned. But he is right that looking at the grand scheme of things, everything is connected and thus everything can in fact be art. It reminds me of the cosmic viewpoint of the Stoics. He went on to remark that humans have an obsession with what we create and we only value things on the scale of human interaction with the phenomenal world, which greatly removes our ability to interact with the world outside of that conceptual framework. The ability to see the non-dual nature of reality, the Buddhists call this oneness, and it does in fact not require one to consider themselves as spiritual in any way, is greatly impaired by our man-made system of values that appreciates our collective abstractions and distractions higher than the greater truth behind all of what we are, creating a separation between man and nature and the creation of man and the creation of nature. But these are not two, there's only one, and that oneness is what makes it so clear that the boulder can be art. I do have a spiritual side in me, and thus I can feel how right he is. And I do clearly see that my way of separating myself through my definition of the term is quite problematic at times, and actually keeps me from experiencing this oneness my friend is introducing in my life, and that I believe to be a really neat thing to cultivate. I don't just understand, but even internalize the profoundness of the thought that nature is art from a philosophical standpoint. But I would still not call a boulder or the act of placing a boulder somewhere art, which for me is purely a matter of terminology. Nature for me doesn't create art. It creates nature, which is beautiful and has far-reaching value, but it's still not art. Nature is the ultimate and original creator. It's all we have and all we are. But I think that we take the term and slap it way too thoughtlessly onto everything, and that is an object of great disappointment for me. Because if everything is suddenly art, then actually nothing is anymore. If a stone is suddenly art, then I have nothing to relate and talk about anymore where art is concerned. Because there's nothing to distinguish anymore. For me, this is not freedom of expression and self-realization. It's a degradation of something that I once felt was bigger than myself. And that was a good thing, because it was something to strive for. Art is an incredibly subjective phenomenon, and thus it's equally subjective to define it. I don't think it possible to get on fully common ground here, so I won't even try and instead just offer one more way of approaching the topic from one more possible angle. My angle. So what is my definition of the term art? Physically, art can be a lot of things. A painting or a sculpture, of course, but also a piece of music, or a movie, or a dance performance. But is every painting automatically art? If you would ask me, no. Absolutely not. For me, the physicality doesn't matter. Painting something doesn't automatically mean art. I heavily stepped on a pair of toes with that at some point in my life, when I remarked that concept art, for example, is not art, but actually design. Yes, it has determinate. But just because we slap a word on a job title to be able to categorize and communicate the profession and to make it easier to identify someone who does concept art, doesn't mean that the term alone is proving it to be art. I strongly disagree here. It can be art, but most often it's not. The same holds true for me in the case of most illustrations, especially book illustrations that serve purely as accompaniment to text. Most tattoos are merely decorative, or serve the purpose of storytelling or belonging, and thus to me are not art either. And believe it or not, but I even include most old masterpieces to the non-art category. For me, Da Vinci made illustrations to Bible texts. Canaletto recreated city views that would nowadays be used as postcards, and Rembrandt made portraits like like your local copy shop is doing in the back, just much slower and more flattering. For me, everything I just mentioned falls into the category of craftsmanship, like tailoring or carpentry or glass blowing. It's impressive, it's beautiful, it's important. But a cup of tea is not automatically art just because it is especially well done or because it looks more fancy than your average cup of tea. For me, art does not lie in the eye of the beholder, but in the message of the artist. It has nothing to do with taste, but with meaning. It also has nothing to do with quality or complexity, because as long as the intent is there, the meaning is there. Now, it needs to be understood here that in my specific case, calling something art or not is just my way of making a distinction between a work that is purely decorative and a work that has the intention to speak, so to say. I need to have two different words to explain to another human being where I draw the line and why I draw it there. And in this case, the only way to do that is by calling one painting art and another painting craftsmanship. But other people already attached another meaning to the word art. And this is where the misunderstanding happens, and where I probably stepped on quite a few more toes here. I apologize to everyone who felt stepped on, but this is how debating works. For me, true art is highly emotional and is always giving birth to an intention. The intention of saying something in pictures or in musical notes that can't be said in mere words. It also can mean to say something in different words rather than just plainly describing it, which is where poetry comes in. Art is an expression of complex feelings and experiences that are hard to put into an essay or in a documentary, and it usually evokes feelings in return. And I'm not talking about the feeling that this would look great on your bedroom wall. It's an extension of who you are, a non-explanatory expression of something deeper and more profound than depictions of Jesus or Dragonball fan art. This is, however, a quite volatile definition, and I have to admit that it doesn't always hold true 100%. But it doesn't have to. Nothing in our world is perfectly stable, especially not when it comes to the human condition. This is, once again, just my attempt to explain something inexplicable. And on top of all that, people lie. The only person who can confirm the intent of a painting is the painter. But humans are quite good at stating the untrue. One just needs to buy some surgical steel earrings off of Amazon to see how easy it is to label something as something that it's clearly not, when you put them into your earlobes and get an allergic reaction. Things are not magically bound to their name. And often enough, the meaning of a work of art succeeds the work instead of preceding it. Meaning that strokes are being made at random, and then a dramatic story is created about these strokes afterwards. But there actually was no such intent beforehand. So I absolutely disagree with one of many popular opinions that your work is art just because you or someone else says so. Especially not galleries, who more often than not abuse the word for capital gain only. Timing also plays a big role in my opinion. Abstract art, for example, was true art when antiquated conventions were consciously broken with it. There was a clear message behind it. Paintings that look like modern art but came much later have nothing to do with that message anymore, because these conventions have long been broken by now. Thus, I personally see contemporary action paintings and abstract expressionism after Mark Rothko as purely decorational these days, if not bound to a very personal, emotional intention of the creator, which, as I just mentioned, is a criteria that just a creator can prove to be the case, but actually also not. When I applied in galleries, I found not just one, but two that had works of two different people exhibited that both painted portraits of Marilyn Monroe in quite similar fashion to each other, and also quite close to what Warhol did in the past. This for me is not art. It's the craft of copying, and most likely the only intent there is a monetary one. But modern society sees it as such, and thus art for me is dead. A dead term that has no meaning anymore. If the 24th copy of a Marilyn Monroe photograph with some uninspired paint splashes on it is considered art, then I honestly don't want to be an artist. There must be more to it. Something purely human, something deeply emotional that nature just cannot create because it is free of emotion. Something profound that is reserved for the right time, the right headspace, and the right message. Something that deserves to be lifted above a generalization. Otherwise, I would personally find no pleasure in pursuing it, which would take a huge chunk out of my personality. And I do have to admit that I'm already going through quite a sad process with all of this, where I see less and less the point in putting my soul into my work. Because I'm fighting a battle against the new conventions in the art market that is impossible for me to win. For me, the term now seems just a shadow of what it once was, if it actually ever was what I would love it to be. Maybe I'm just too much of an idealist and romantic. Now, one thing that I can't stress enough at this point though, and which I felt in the past was what people had an issue with when I voiced my opinion about the definition of art. Not calling something art doesn't automatically mean that it's not valuable. On the contrary, I'm a sucker for quality craftsmanship, and I personally value a beautiful piece of furniture much higher than Manzoni's poop in a can. Art or not, shit is still shit, and I would never pay 100k for it. Being a gardener that places rocks somewhere is beautiful in itself. It's enough. It doesn't have to be more than that. Why does it have to be art? Why can't it just be thoughtful gardening that brings joy and serenity through thoughtfully placed elements? I hope I didn't offend any one of you too gravely. I'm not degrading anyone's hard work. This is not about your work. It's about how we name it and how we advance a discussion regarding that work in accordance with that name. I do in fact think that everything has the potential to be art, but not just because you put a pencil on a sheet of paper. If that would be the case, then we would in fact degrade a truly thoughtful work of art that is not just a purely decorative centerpiece for your next Thanksgiving dinner. To prove my goodwill towards the free nature of art, I would like to read to you my personal artist's statement that you can find on my website. And yes, I call it artist's statement, since certain terms are already established in the world. I am dependent on those in order to explain my work somehow to others. It is what it is. As a typical victim of my generation, I too feel that desperate need to create something unique and to be something no one has ever been before me. I am painfully aware that none of my experiences and dreams are special in itself, but my individual combination of those has, without a doubt, never before existed in another person. The same is true for every viewer of a piece of art, and exactly that is what makes every artwork unique in return. Not the work itself, but the individual sum of parts of the one that painted it and of all the people that look at it, each on their own seeing something else. Knowing this is what drives me to do what I do, so that at the end of a very ordinary day, I hopefully created something that is unique for everyone else. Writing the script was not easy, and I see it as incomplete. Not just because the subject is so vague, but especially because it meant to separate my absolutely unique point of view from a much greater universal viewpoint that is ever-changing, while I myself am also ever-changing too. My views of the world and everything in it are not at all permanent, and that's a good thing. It's hard to fit a world with a different heart and see it with different eyes. It's hard to accept that you and others around you are changing, and to embrace that change instead of fighting it. But I know it's always worth it to try, because this is how we grow. It's always worth it to listen and to reconsider, and it's always worth it to stay curious. Thanks for watching. So now is the time to either like and subscribe or roast me in the comments. Oh, clumsy attempt. The content flux. Oh, constant. Oh, philosophy. Oops. That was correct, but way too slow. Jesus Christ. Oh. That bowl, stone, include as masterpieces. Well, oh, this is tough. Portraits, not magically. Succeeds. Let me succeed.